Hello and welcome back to Lingering Light, your sanctuary for listening on YouTube. Pull up a chair, perhaps pour yourself a cup of tea, and let's settle in together. Tonight, we are exploring a theme that is particularly poignant for those of us in the afternoon of our lives. We've spent decades building, doing, and taking care of everyone else. But what happens when the house is quiet? What do we do with the silence that remains? Thomas Merton was born in 1915 in France. He was a man who experienced the roar of the world, the intellectual vibrancy of New York and London, before he chose the profound, rustic quiet of the Abbey of Gethsemane in Kentucky. Living as a monk and later as a hermit in a simple cabin surrounded by cedar trees, he realized that the greatest journey we ever take is the walk from our head to our heart. In his 1958 masterpiece, Thoughts in Solitude, Merton reminds us that being alone is not a tragedy to be avoided, but a luxury to be savored. He teaches us that in the silence of our senior years, we aren't fading away, we are finally coming into focus. Tonight, we follow the story of Eleanor, the busy heart. Eleanor is 72. She is a retired schoolteacher whose life has always been defined by the need. Her children needed her students needed her, and lately, her digital device seems to need her every 5 minutes. Eleanor is terrified of the empty nest and the quiet calendar. She feels that if she isn't useful, she isn't real. But through the lens of Merton's wisdom, Eleanor discovers that her most important work hasn't even begun yet. She learns that the silence she feared is actually the golden room where she can finally meet her true self, face to face, without a single apology. As Eleanor's last grandchild went off to college and her volunteer commitments dwindled, the silence in her home felt more like an intruder than a reward. For 40 years, her identity had been attached to a to-do list, and with no meetings to attend or meals to prepare for 12, she found herself wandering like a ghost in her own kitchen. She checked her phone every 10 minutes, hoping for a notification that would prove she was still connected to the living world. She opened Merton's book and read a sentence that felt like a warm hand resting on her shoulder. We have become so obsessed with doing that we have forgotten how to be. We fear that silence because it tells us that the usefulness outside is not the same as the value inside. Eleanor smiled gently, feeling the dry wit of her teacher persona returning. Eleanor, she said to herself, you've taught children how to read for 70 years, but you've forgotten how to read your own heart. She had been checking her phone like it was an oxygen tank, but realized that what it provided was nothing but carbon dioxide. Part 2, Loneliness versus Solitude, the difference between a prison and a palace. As the weeks passed, Eleanor began to grapple with Merton's most famous distinction, the difference between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness, she realized, was the fear that no one was thinking about her. Solitude, however, was the joy of finally thinking about herself and God. Loneliness felt like being locked in a cold room, solitude felt like opening the windows to let the spring air in. Merton argued that our society tries to cure loneliness with more noise, but the only cure for loneliness is actually deeper solitude. Eleanor noticed that when she stopped frantically calling her daughter just to chat about nothing, her actual conversations became richer. I was using my family as a distraction from my own soul, she mused. I was a digital beggar, asking for crumbs of attention. But in this solitude, I'm finding a feast. She began to see her age not as a diminishment, but as a simplification. Merton taught her that the desert of old age is where the soul finally gets some breathing room. She stopped seeing her quiet Tuesday afternoons as empty blocks of time and started seeing them as sacred appointments. She was no longer a lonely senior, she was a solitary explorer. The ache of being unneeded by the world was being replaced by the thrill of being needed by her own inner life. She was moving from a prison of what now, to a palace of I am. One of the most humorous and liberating aspects of Merton's book for Eleanor was the concept of humility. Merton cautions that even spiritual life can turn into a performance. We desire to be recognized as the wise grandmother or the serene elder. However, true solitude, Merton asserts, is where we relinquish all our titles. It is the space where we are at peace with being nobody in the eyes of the world, allowing us to be everything in the eyes of the divine. Eleanor caught herself imagining how she would describe her meditation practice at the next bridge club meeting. She wanted to sound enlightened. "Eleanor, you old fraud," she laughed, shaking her head. "You're trying to win a gold medal in quietness. You're turning your soul into another trophy for the mantelpiece." She decided to spend an entire afternoon simply watching the squirrels in her backyard. No intentions, no spiritual goals, just observing the chaos of nature. She felt a deep relief in retiring from herself. She didn't have to be the teacher anymore. She didn't have to be the matriarch. In the humble silence of her garden, she was just a part of the landscape, as natural as the oak tree and as unbothered as the grass. This being nobody felt like the first vacation she had truly taken in her entire life. Merton insisted that we don't find the sacred by escaping the physical world, but by paying closer attention to it. For Eleanor, this meant that her kitchen and her living room were transformed. Solitude turned her chores into prayers. The steam from her tea kettle, the weight of a well-worn quilt, the sound of the rain against the window, these weren't just background noises, they were the very language of God. She began to practice the prayer of attention. When she folded her laundry, she didn't rush through it to get to the next thing. She felt the texture of the cotton, the warmth of the fabric from the dryer. "I used to do this while watching the news," she thought. "I was poisoning my laundry with the world's anxiety. Now, I'm just folding towels. And somehow, folding towels feels like a holy act." Merton's words sang in her heart, "The window of the soul is the present moment." If we are always looking for the next big thing, we will miss the only real thing that is right in front of us. A saint is simply someone who is fully present to the person or the task at hand. She realized that her senior years weren't a waiting room for the end, they were a gallery of small wonders. She spent an hour looking at an old photograph, not with sadness for what was lost, but with gratitude for what had been. She found that solitude had given her new eyes. The ordinary had become extraordinary, and the mundane had become a miracle. She wasn't just killing time, she was consecrating it. Eleanor made the surprising discovery that solitude has made her a better mother and grandmother. Merton taught that when we are in our own silence and peace, we no longer cling to others. Solitude creates a healthy space between people, allowing for deep connections. Eleanor always thought of her busy son at the law firm. In the past, she felt hurt when he didn't call, but now she felt a deep and quiet compassion for him. He is still climbing his mountain, she thought. I don't need to feel real without his calls. My love for him is now a steady light, not a desperate hook. Eleanor felt no anxiety about having enough to talk about or the need to seem interesting as she prepared for her daughter's visit. She was bringing her silence's golden room to her family. She had become not just a simple grandmother, but a sanctuary. She learned that her solitude was the greatest gift to her loved ones. By being okay with being alone, she was teaching them how to be free. In the quiet of her evening, Eleanor began to reflect on her entire life, the mistakes, the triumphs, the ordinary days, and the heartbreaks. Merton's philosophy helped her see that nothing had been wasted. In solitude, the judgmental mind, the one that says, "I should have done better," begins to soften into the compassionate heart, the one that says, "It was all part of the path." She realized that her life wasn't a series of lost opportunities, but a beautiful, tangled vine that had finally reached the sun. "I'm not a used-up teacher," she whispered to the darkening room, a tear of pure acceptance tracing a path through her wrinkles. "I am a masterpiece of 72 years in the making. Every wrinkle is a sentence in a story that God is still writing." Merton taught her that the silence of old age is the final polish on the soul. It is the time when the ego finally stops shouting, and the spirit finally begins to sing. Eleanor looked at her hands, hands that had wiped tears, graded papers, held babies, and now, finally, were held in prayer. She felt a profound yes to her own existence. She wasn't just surviving her old age, she was crowning her life. She was no longer afraid of the end of the book, because she had finally fallen in love with the author. As Eleanor sat in her favorite chair, watching the stars appear one by one, she realized that the fear of the void she had felt months ago had been replaced by a confidence in the light. Merton's thoughts in solitude had given her a map to the most important territory of all, her own internal home. "It's so much bigger than I thought," she realized. This silence isn't a lack of sound. It's the presence of love. She understood now that she would never be lonely again, because she was never truly alone. She was a part of a vast, silent communion that spanned the ages. She felt a playful, witty spark in her spirit. Well, Thomas Merton, she thought, you were right. The back room of the heart is where all the best parties are held. It just took me 70 years to find the invitation. She closed her eyes, not in sleep, but in a deep, conscious rest. She was ready for whatever came next, a phone call, a visitor, or another day of glorious silence. Eleanor was no longer the busy heart. She was the peaceful soul, and her light was lingering longer and brighter than ever before. As Eleanor embraced her new identity as the peaceful soul, she discovered a profound secret. The silence she had cultivated in her golden room was not a stagnant pool, but a living spring. It began to overflow, trickling out of her quiet cottage and into the lives of everyone she touched. She used to believe that to be a good mother or a loyal friend, she had to be a constant whirlwind of advice, gestures, and nervous energy. But now, she realized that her most potent gift was simply her unshakable presence. The true test of this new grace came when her son, Michael, visited for a weekend. Michael was a man made of high-tensile wire and espresso, his mind always vibrating with the anxieties of his law firm. Usually, Eleanor would meet his tension with her own, fluttering around him with "Are you eating enough?" and "You look so tired, dear," which only made him retreat further into his shell. This time, she simply sat with him on the porch. When he launched into a frantic monologue about a lost contract, she didn't jump in to fix it. She didn't offer a platitude. She just listened with a heart so still it acted like a professional-grade shock absorber. After a long silence, Michael looked at her, his shoulders visibly dropping 2 inches. "Mom," he said, sounding like the little boy he used to be, "it's so quiet here. I feel like I can finally hear myself think." Eleanor just winked and squeezed his hand. "That's not the house, Michael," she thought with a witty glint in her eyes. "That's just the sound of your mother finally getting out of God's way." Eleanor realized that her solitude had turned her into a human sanctuary. By being at home within herself, she provided a home for others. She started a silence circle at the local senior center, not a place for gossip or bingo, but a place where people sat together for 20 minutes in shared, comfortable stillness. At first, they fidgeted. But soon, they began to crave it. They were learning that their afternoon years weren't a slow fade into the dark, but a gathering of the light. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and liquid gold, Eleanor picked up her pen. She wrote a single note to herself on the back of a grocery receipt: "The world is loud, but the heart is deep. Don't just do something, stand there." She laughed at her own little reversal of the old cliché. She felt a magnificent sense of legacy. Her masterpiece wasn't the quilt she had sewn or the lessons she had taught, it was this indestructible piece that she could now leave behind like a scent in the air. As she sat in the deepening twilight, she knew that the lingering light wasn't just a metaphor. It was the reality of a soul that had finally learned to rest, and in that rest, had found the power to heal the world, one silent breath at a time. My dear friends, at Lingering Light, Eleanor discovered that our later years are not a disconnection from the world, but a reconnection to the source. Thomas Merton's Thoughts in Solitude is a gentle, persistent whisper to all of us who have lived long and seen much: do not fear the quiet. Do not fear the slow pace. For it is in the stillness that the masterpiece of your life finally becomes visible to you. You are not fading, you are arriving. I have a question for you tonight. What would happen if you stopped seeing your quiet time as a sign of being forgotten, and started seeing it as a sign of being set apart? What if you turned off the television for just 1 hour tomorrow and sat in your golden room with a cup of tea, just to see who showed up in your heart? Share your solitude moments in the comments. Let's celebrate the beauty of our afternoon light together. Until our next gathering, honor your silence. Bless your memories. Trust the peace. And stay in the light, the deep, quiet, and eternally radiant light of your own soul. Good night, dear friends. Show some love by hitting like and subscribe. Also, don't forget to drop a comment. Thank you.